Forget everything you thought you knew about aging. We're not just talking about wrinkles, we're talking brain power and longevity. Welcome to the episode that unravels the power of your genes to help you age well and actively fight dementia. From personalized skincare based on your DNA to biohacking your biology for optimal health, we're here to guide you. This is the episode and the start of your journey to a healthier, sharper you. Welcome to Fading Memories, your source for all things dementia caregiving. I'm your host, Jen Fink, and I have had 3 generations of loved ones with dementia, and I'm here to share the knowledge I've gained with you. Memories listeners, I always appreciate you tuning in with me today, all the way from Australia. I think it's Australia. I know it's down under, is Dr. Sherard Paul. He is the author of Biohacking Your Genes, and we're going to be talking about how we can use some biohacking, understand how our skin health is conducive to aging well, and other topics based on preventing dementia. So thanks for joining me. It's Sherard, right?
That's right. Thank you for having me.
It's the end of the day. I've been busy, and now my brain is like, "Are we done yet?" So, are you from Australia or is it New Zealand? I forgot.
New Zealand, yeah.
Oh,
I
okay.
teach in Australia as well, so we don't get offended. It's fine.
As soon as I said Australia, I'm like, oh, I think it's New Zealand, but
It is New Zealand, yes.
so it's the next day for him. So we can all be rest assured that at least tomorrow is coming.
That's right.
So can you give the listeners your background and how you came to write the book Biohacking Your Genes?
Yeah, so my main work is actually in skin oncology to do with skin cancer and skin rot. And down under, we have the highest skin cancer rates in the world because obviously we have the highest UV, our sun is very strong. And I guess what I noticed was an anomaly when you see patients who come in and if they've got any cancers, in general, you do genetic profiling to see what sort of medications helps them the best, right? Especially when you're treating more advanced ones. But we don't actually tend to do that from a wellness point of view. Like we don't look at our diets and lifestyles the same way. So it followed on a previous book I wrote about 7 to 8 years ago called The Genetics of Health, which talked about these topics. And this was the next it was the next book on the same topic. So fundamentally, it explores, that how we can modify our genes by our actions, because genes are just fundamentally protein makers, right?
Okay.
So basically, we do things which are good for our gene type, then we make good proteins which help us. And this is just fine tuning it to making medicine more personalized, right? So there are, and obviously there are general rules for all people. So, there are broad rules which are in the book as well. But if you want to take it to the next level, this is more about personalizing it. The other important point is that I've often said you can't have bad health and good skin. And the reason for that is skin reflects what's going on both outside and inside. Like outside is a sun damage or a UV pollution, all that kind of stuff. And on the inside, if you've got something metabolic going on, you're more prone to pigmentation or rashes or various things. And one of my research, the main groundbreaking research I did in my medical career is in skin lines and wrinkling. And one of the things we found is under each new wrinkle that forms, you get a new lymphatic vessel forming. So there's some lymphangiogenesis going on. So in other words, certain parts of the face, we can actually scan and we can pick people who are at risk of, say, heart disease or something else just from scanning their faces. So I think that brought me into, that's where the link is. One is, how did somebody working in skin end up writing a book like this? One is because you can't have bad skin and good health, so you're actually looking at health. And the second thing is, of course, it's personalizing your dietary and lifestyle choices to best fit with your gene type so that you can live your best, fittest, and most active and optimal life.
That's been my goal for probably the last, let's see, since 2006. I went on a big weight loss journey because my dad's side of the family has obesity and diabetes, type 2 diabetes. I got the obesity gene, so I had to figure out how to reverse that, and I did. Yay. That took a little work, which I don't like because now my neck is, I think, older looking than the rest of me. But this is what happens when you lose a tremendous amount of weight. Let's see. My mom's side of the family's got the Alzheimer's and the dementia, so it's like I had to I had to find a way to have a healthy life without diabetes, and that turned into also probably preventing or helping to prevent any kind of dementias. So glad I took that journey. Although there's days like today when it's like, I feel like I've done too much weight training this week. Every muscle is cranking at me. Maybe I'll do some more stretching tonight.
Yes, and I think, the benefit of exercise you can't overstate, especially, from a brain health point of view, leg movement exercises, right? Yeah.
So my cycling is a good choice then.
Yeah, cycling is a good choice. Walking, running, walking your dog, you were saying earlier, that's a great choice. Yeah.
The problem with walking the dog is she likes to stop and sniff a lot.
That's right.
It's not as much of a cardio workout for me because there's a lot of stopping and sniffing.
That's right.
So how do we, I find it interesting you can scan someone's face and learn more about their overall health. I actually last week was at my second annual dermatology appointment, for this skin inspection, for lack of a better term, and 2 years in a row, doing good, which considering I'm pretty pale, I've been prone to sunburns. I was surprised that there wasn't anything of concern. I'm glad. I have a friend who has gone through a lot of skin cancer treatments. Those don't look at all fun. So glad I'm skipping those.
That's good.
So what are we learning from scanning our skin? How does that work? That sounds really fascinating.
Yeah, that's more at the moment at a research end. But on the other hand, like basically what we're looking at where your new wrinkles are forming. So we can actually see where your existing wrinkles are and where your new wrinkles are forming. And so that gives us an idea. And we know that certain parts of the body, like around your earlobes and things like that, are directly correlate with a higher risk of heart disease. So it's those kind of things like, or if somebody is suddenly developing more wrinkling, then that means the more lymphangiogenicis going on. So you're thinking something else is happening metabolically. So often we'll see that in patients as well. Like we'll see, and you will actually think, look, you need to test for other things. So it's quite interesting looking at skin. That does give you an idea. Yeah.
That is really
In
fascinating.
other words, I think the simple explanation is the same metabolic pathways, or at a cellular level, the same antioxidant pathways which are related to, chronic inflammation, chronic disease, acute chronic injuries, and even emotional stress are also the pathways. There's one pathway, one particular one called NRF2, which is implicated in aging. And so therefore, if you are under a lot of chronic stress, for example, if you're in an abusive relationship, or you've got a cancer, or you've got, chronic injury or were not treated, all these things can make you age as well, right? So sometimes when we see people and you see somebody and you see them after a few months and you think, something, the skin is suddenly aged, you are actually starting to look at other causes for it internally.
That's interesting. So what got you interested in kind of going down this path of looking at skin as it for our overall health?
I think basically because, obviously, before you specialize in something like skin, you do your general kind of medicine. So obviously you have a general medical qualification. So obviously I'm interested in general health, but more from a personal point of view, I think I'm very much, it's been my mantra over the last, 20 years is really looking at optimizing performance in people, right? We only live once in our form, right? So I think whatever your beliefs are, whether you think you go to heaven or hell or reincarnated or whatever, in this form, as yourself, Jennifer, or myself, we're only going to come in once. So I think the key thing is, live our best life. So how can we make people optimize performance? And the other thing, what I found is when my previous book was written, I was advising a lot of sports teams and that kind of stuff. So you find that, this is to some degree done when it comes to athletes and sometimes at a higher end, at high performance sports like for Olympians or things like that. People do these tests or for very highly paid professional athletes because people see it as an investment, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't seem to happen at an individual level. So what we're trying to do is get people to invest in their own health. So, not only do we give you the general rules, but if you want to do your tests, you can, and then you can get your own blueprint for, healthier living as well. Like blue genes are our blueprint, but like I always like to say, they're not our destiny in the sense that, there's so many diets, like we were talking about brain health earlier and on your, show called Fading Memories, with their general diets, which can reduce dementia by, a risk by up to 50%. Like, so it's actually, there are lots of general things you can do. And then some things you may have a higher risk for, and then you can cut down on those further as well. So,
Like the genetic sweet tooth that runs through my maternal side of the family.
yes, too much sugar is no good for anything. I think generally now in the world, we just tipped over, I think maybe 7 or 8 years ago, like there are more people now who die from overnutrition than undernutrition, malnutrition, right? Whereas if you look 20 years ago, there's still a lot more malnourishment in the world. I mean, still is in many countries, but now overall, even in those countries, the wealthier people are overnourished. So you generally find people are consuming more calories than they need. And a big part of it is, of course, processed foods and high sugar, because a lot of high fructose corn syrup and things like that. Yeah, which, is quite prevalent in America.
It tastes good.
Yes, that's right. Absolutely. And,
That
and
was
it's
one.
actually, and it's partly habituation as well. There are plenty of studies done, in childhood. If you introduce people to it, then later on you like it, right? Same with salt or same with, whereas if in childhood, if you didn't have a lot, later on you find that you don't have the same kind of a tooth. But having said that, when we do gene testing, we can find that there are some people who actually have literally a sweet tooth gene, right? So we can actually tell those people. Similarly, we can tell the people for whom a high protein diet would be better or a high fat diet. Like some people will say, I tried the Atkins diet or whatever, and it worked for me, but it won't work for everybody. So we can actually pick the people for whom those things would be more effective.
I would bet two things. I would bet I have a genetic disposition to a sweet tooth because my maternal grandfather did not feel a meal was complete until he had dessert. So I know he had something sugary
Yeah.
after lunch and after dinner. I don't know about breakfast. I hope he didn't, but he lived pretty good. He got prostate cancer that spread to his bones. So that was not a great way to go. But I can pretty much guarantee the Atkins diet, I would probably gain weight or be sick real fast. Because when I went on my weight loss journey, what I discovered is if there is a famine, I'm going to win because my body stores fat. Like, I'm not sure you can get any more ideal in the storage department.
Yeah.
If I walk past a nice marbled grass fed steak, it's going to be like, oh, let's store that over here. So I have to be very lean, but I can eat more starchy carbs than, say, the average 50 plus some year old woman. And I know that because I've had friends that can eat more fat but can't eat more bread. So, you have to figure out what works to fuel your body. And that's what I learned like 15 years ago now. Yes. That, doesn't matter if it's healthy, if it's, if I tip the scales on the fat, first off, I don't feel good, which is not fun. And then I can guarantee you my body's like, oh, we're just going to pack that over here, a little bit over here. And then my pants don't fit. So It's interesting. I think people don't seem to understand that, we're all individuals. Some of the wellness people are talking about, oh, cut carbs or do this or do that. It's like, no, you got to figure out what works for you, because you got to do it forever.
Uh, yeah, that's right. And like I said, look, we know some people maybe like you may be more intuitive about it, but in general, people aren't intuitive as well. Like for example, I'll give you a personal example. Like if I have a coffee after midday, I'll get like palpitations and I can't sleep at night. So I can have it in the morning. So when it comes to caffeine, 50% of the population are like fast metabolizers for whom coffee is actually very good. And for the other half, they're slow metabolizers, so for which coffee can increase your risk of getting irregular heartbeats and so on and so forth. But I thought, therefore, I would be a slow metabolizer. But when I tested myself, and I was actually a fast metabolizer, so the reason I was getting those was because it was binding with adenosine, and the reason I don't sleep is different reason, not because of a caffeine sensitivity, right? So for those kind of things, it's not necessarily intuitive. But I think the things where they're more intuitive are sometimes like your lactose and things like that, right? Like I find that as an adulthood, I avoid milk, like cow's milk. I mean, if it's fermented, it's fine, but because if you have milk, it just doesn't. And I'm a bit lactose intolerant. But what was interesting is that came through in the genetic profile as well. That was a bit more intuitive because you sort of knew that if you're having more milk, it was sort of upsetting your stomach, right? So likewise, probably for you, some people can't have starchy foods, but some things are not intuitive, which we can pick them. But like I said, yeah, it's really important to also listen to your body a bit. But the problem sometimes with high processed foods is because a lot of chemicals, they're not, we weren't designed to digest them in the first place. You know what I mean? Like as human beings, we originally man ate a lot of animals and then they ate some weeds and plants and things, but not a lot of hybridized fruit or sweet stuff. And the only sweet when it came about later was honey, right? And it only made up about 5% of people's diets. But now sugar makes a large part of people's diets. So, but in the processed food, you have a lot of chemicals which are in there, which are then not what we were used to digesting historically or ancestrally. So therefore, our bodies can't be intuitive with them, right? So that's where having a gene testing thing sort of helps because you just fine tune it for yourself. So we can say, look, eating more, this is good for you, avoiding this is good for you, or you are really a little gluten intolerant or not, or just moderate, or, various things like that. Or what kind of supplements, like, what kind of minerals are you more likely to be lacking kind of things, because those things are smaller trace elements like we're not so intuitive about. So some people generally need more, magnesium or choline or whatever, and we can pick those things.
Makes sense.
Hmm.
I'm sure you've dealt with people who, like my father, when he was diagnosed with diabetes, announced he was going to eat what he wanted and die happy. Well, trust me, he didn't die happy. And I've met a lot of people who have health issues that know they shouldn't eat the chips, the garbagey food, but they just can't seem to, I don't know, motivate themselves. Or I know somebody that lost a lower leg because they had diabetes and they didn't watch what they ate. And I'm like, I'm sorry, there is no food worth losing one of my legs. Just, I love sugar, I love food, but nope, I'm not going there. Is that just conditioning, or is that something that's just, I never understood like how you could be that like non-intuitive about your own health. Like somebody's telling you to stop eating this way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, one part is denial where people just don't want to admit it. The second part is also the addictive potential of a lot of these foods as well, right? High sugar. So, for example, some years ago, we were looking in my previous book, I mentioned, like, if you look at fizzy drinks like Coke or some Red Bull or whatever, they have a lot of sugar, which is beyond what you would normally tolerate. Like what I mean is if you were drinking a cup of tea or coffee and you liked a little bit of sugar, you would not be able to add that much sugar and find it palatable. So the way they get around it is we know that caffeine dulls your sweet taste receptors. Right. So that's why these drinks have a lot of caffeine, because if you add more caffeine, then it dulls your sweet taste receptors, so you can add more sugar. And if you add more sugar, there is a certain point beyond the sugar gives you the dopamine kick so that you become addictive. So you really need it. Right.
Interesting.
So similarly with high fat foods. So the problem is a lot of these foods, there's also an addiction aspect to it. Like, once you eat it, it's very difficult for you to get off unless, like you say, with anything, you are actually prepared to do it either for a health reason or you're just having the willpower and saying, yes, I'm going to take charge of my health because I don't want to look like this or I don't want to end up like my grandfather or something like that. Yeah.
That makes sense. I also know I learned a lot about nutrition, losing over 100 pounds, is that any starchy carb that's combined with a high fat, so like potato chips or pizza, they're almost impossible to eat in moderation because it just, the way it lights up different parts of your brain, just, it like pretty much didn't, it prevents you from having any kind of willpower. It's really
Right.
interesting. So how does diet affect your brain health and, you know, eating this yucky way could be a problem, especially for somebody like me. So my mom had Alzheimer's, my maternal grandmother had vascular dementia, my maternal great grandmother had dementia. And then my dad's side of the family's got all the diabetes. So it's like, oh, I better eat good. So
Yeah.
I'm not interested in any of those
Dad,
problems.
yeah. My dad's got Alzheimer's. So yes, it's a personal interest of mine. So yeah, no, absolutely. Look, the first, if nothing else you're doing, I think one thing I would say is the best superfood when it comes to Alzheimer's are blueberries, right? So we know any number of studies, both from children to adults, short-term to long-term studies, from people taking tests after eating a cup of blueberries to blueberry powders to various things. There's just no doubt that it is just a superfood for your brain compared to other berries. Like what I mean is you don't see the same effect from strawberries or raspberries to the degree as you see with blueberries, right? So I guess in the Mind diet, which is a diet which originally was developed for, it was called the Mind Dash diet because it's like an acronym for a diet to stop hypertension, and it became Mediterranean intervention neuroregenerative diet. But what it really does is, so for example, there's like I've done it like an ABCD rule in the book, which is A is, avoiding too much red meat, because obviously if you have too much red meat, it increases your risk of Alzheimer's. And then eating blueberries, like I said, is just so good for you. You can't say how good it is. So the more, the better. Then I guess even things like, so if you're eating meats, then, chicken soup, for example, like we said, chicken soup for the soul actually is quite good. So they've done studies on essence of chicken in Malaysia and chicken. So as long as you're not deep frying your chicken, chicken is fine. And then, of course, dairy is not good either, right? A lot of dairy, because milk, particularly, we know that it has a lot of inflammatory effect, especially as we get older. So the more fermented it is not as bad. So, the more uh, fermented the cheeses, so the more smelly the cheeses are, like your Parmesan or something, are fine because they've got much more lower lactose levels than others. But generally, so dairy is not as good. So that would be the D. And then the E is everything green, like, your, broccolis and collard greens and spinach and kale and all those things are very good for you. Beans as well, green beans, all those kind of stuff. And then I guess um, the other thing would be not drinking a lot of alcohol. So, the studies have shown that if you obviously have a lot of alcohol, it directly affects your brain. Drinking in moderation, if you're doing, like, if you're having a glass a day and not exceeding it, as long as you have a couple of days a week where you are free of it, you're okay if you're having particularly red wine. Interestingly, white wines have acetaldehyde, so they negate some of the effects. But red wine, a glass a day, as long as you have 2 free days, it's okay. The problem is people don't stop with a glass. So then beyond it, there is no evidence that drinking a lot helps, but that kind of very moderate red wine is actually not bad. Partly it is to do with the dark grape content of it, right? And then I guess the other thing would be glass wines, would be whole grains are generally good, like your raw oats, don't not the processed ones. So I think quinoa, all the kind of the whole grains are quite good for you. Avoid the white rices, have the more whole grain kind of foods. So I think, and then including the foods, particularly the most important thing from oil cooking and point of view, I guess, is olive oil. Again, olive oil benefits huge. That's one of the reasons the Mediterranean diet works so well. But actually, studies have done, like there's a story I was saying in the book, where the more bitter the olive oil tastes, the more anti-inflammatory effect it has. So obviously, the extra virgin is better than the others. It's a myth, like people used to say, because olive oil doesn't have a high heat point. So obviously, people were like, you can't use extra virgin in your cooking because it's only to drizzle on salads and stuff. Technically, you can. It doesn't actually become trans fats or dangerous like other fat oils become. So generally, olive oil is very good, and particularly extra virgin, and particularly the more bitter tasting ones have more of an anti-inflammatory effect. And I guess the other thing would be, if you're in nuts, would be things like walnuts of all the nuts, because you see, almonds are lower calories, so they're good for you as a filler if you're trying to not eat too much, but they don't do anything specific for Alzheimer's or anything, whereas walnuts have omega-3 and they're particularly good for you. I guess the other thing was, when I was talking about chicken is good, obviously fish, particularly oily fish, like your salmon and cod and things like that. And normally would be tuna as well, but the problem nowadays is a lot of the fish gets contaminated, and especially big fish like are on international waters, which get canned and stuff, like the tunas often then get contaminated with the water pollution. So, but salmon and cod are generally very good for you. So I think that's generally the gist of a diet, which they found in most studies, that they literally halve your risk if you can stick to this diet of developing Alzheimer's. And interestingly, at this point in time, that's the best we've got. Like one of the things I point on the book is the original hypothesis, which was for Alzheimer's itself, was a flawed hypothesis. Like what happened was 20 years ago, everybody's talking about amyloid beta, and they were saying that the amyloid beta was, and along with the tau proteins, they were causing the tangles, and everybody was like, that's the, the smoking gun for Alzheimer's. But it turns out 20 years later that those images were doctored and those papers were retracted. So what we know now is there's a new theory that probably the beta amyloid makes two other proteins sort of join together, and that's where the research is heading. So that's why there's minimal medications or anything available which is going to prevent it right at this point in time. So really the best you've got is sticking to this diet. And especially for people who have a direct family issue like myself, my dad or you, I think, yeah, this would be essentially the summary.
That's basically what I've been doing for the past 15 years. Minus, well, one, I don't drink because I don't like beer. Wine gives me really, really bad heartburn. And I like sugar. So if I got to pick a poison, it's going to be a brownie over a glass of wine.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, dark chocolate is actually fine as well, right? Because of the fact they have more stearic acid as opposed to the milk one is much more saturated fats. So I think, but generally, like I said, all things are commonality. There's a lot of common things where everybody can do irrespective of the risk. And from an exercise point of view, like I mentioned earlier, leg movement exercises. So that's why when they did studies directly comparing, say, tango versus dancing the tango versus yoga and tai chi and things like that, each one did something different, because yoga was good for like stress relief and lowering blood pressure, whereas tai chi was particularly good for your balance and things like that. But tango, because it's largely a walk, it was actually particularly good for brain health. So that's why even walking, as long as you're holding something, and the theory goes like this: look, our brain fundamentally has three functions: your grasping, which is your primitive reflex, and locomotion, which is your walking and balance. So any exercise which has all the three is particularly beneficial. So like you were saying, you're cycling, you're holding onto your bars and you're balancing, which is good. Tango, you're holding onto somebody. So if you're doing brisk walking, it's good if you're holding onto something, even if you're a dog, whatever. So you're holding on something, right? So that's good. And similarly, any exercise which primary leg movement. So I remember a few years ago, I was at a writers' festival in Dublin in Ireland, and I was saying we can finally forgive the Irish as teasing them for river dance because, even Irish dances, you're holding on to somebody, you're moving your legs, so they're all good for brain movement.
Do we know why leg movement is
Yeah,
particularly good?
particularly, yeah, absolutely, particularly because the brain evolved for movement. So interestingly, studies done from prehistoric man to modern man, and what made us different from apes and things like that is fundamentally man started walking a lot more. And when you started walking a lot more, we developed a larger brain. So most of the brain has, large motor area, motor cortex. And then what happened was the larger the brain, the larger the because the brain is like a computer, right? So you need a cooling system. So if you have a larger brain, then you need the heat or the body to come down. So that's how originally we no longer have fur and we lost our fur and we just retained hair on the head because it protects the brain. So fundamentally, largely, it was the brain evolved for movement. So we know from lots of animal studies. So the best example in this, actually, the proof of it is quite interesting. Is there is an evolutionary biology study or report where there's a creature called the sea squirt, which the sea squirt lives at the bottom, and it's got two life forms, and in one life form, it's sort of walking around. And then it finds a rock and it sort of literally falls in love with the rock. It holds onto the rock and then it never moves for the rest of its life. And once it stops moving, it actually digests, it starts eating up its own brain because it no longer needs it.
That's
And what's
weird.
interesting is it's weird. And what's interesting is it still has its likes and dislikes as what it wants to eat and this and that. So that doesn't compare brain, but the large part is the movement. So initially, as it was moving around, it needs its brain, right?
Hmm.
So the interesting thing is in most creatures like that, if you stop moving, you start losing your brain function. So this is actually shown even in people with Alzheimer's, right? So you'll find that they stop moving enough. So that's why a lot of studies have shown where when people have been encouraged to do, I think even movies where people with Alzheimer's were suddenly dancing or doing stuff, there was a temporary improvement in their brain function. Because fundamentally, the biggest part our brain evolved for really was movement. Majority of our brain focuses on that. Then there's a small area that focuses on balance, and the frontal part focuses on your behavior. But the majority of the brain is all about movement.
That's interesting. That's why I always see all these articles about, do you want to prevent dementia? You got to walk. And there's all these articles on should you walk fast or should you walk slow? And the theory, for lack of a better term, where if you really want a bigger benefit of cognitive health while walking, walk with somebody else and have a conversation, which we know socializing is good for our brains. Or if the soul that you walk with is sniffing another bush another 3 feet from the last bush she sniffed, is to do things like count back from 100 by like threes or sevens, which I'd probably fall down if I had to do that because I'm not mathematically inclined, or to list everything that you can see that starts with a particular letter. So you're engaging like cognitive challenges while walking. So I find that interesting. I guess it's kind of like strength training for your brain when
Yeah,
you do that.
that's it. I think all your other things, like, whether it's Sudoku or crosswords or various things you do, that generally helps keep your brain sharper. But the maximal gain outside the dietary things we discussed is literally in movement. So the more we move, so even like, when they say how lack of sleep is not as good for the brain because of the fact that when you sleep, literally your computer reboots itself, which is your brain, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if people don't sleep well, obviously increases the risk of Alzheimer's. So one of the but what they found is in people who ran a lot, like runners, or if you're doing intense exercise. So if you did 1.5 hours a week of really intensive exercise, so even if you were just a weekend warrior, so what they found is if you didn't do much exercise during the week because you're busy, but you just exercise on the weekends, but you did about an hour and a half or an hour of intense exercise, what they found is to a large degree it nullified a lot of the negative effects you had from lack of sleep. So even that was very helpful. So what we know now is it's actually not bad being a weekend warrior when it comes to exercise. So it doesn't mean you got to do it every day. Like just you get 2 good days of exercise a week, that's actually hugely beneficial as well.
Well, that's helpful to know. I'm a day pretty much daily, because it's now part of my like DNA routine.
Yeah.
Because like my brain is not awake until I've done my workouts, which is interesting because I wasn't that way prior. My prior not skinnier life was I didn't need that. But I do like to go out and ride with a cycling group on Saturdays, and they're very fast. And because I live in the Sierra foothills, there's not very many flat areas, so it's either a slight grade uphill or you're climbing a hill. I don't like climbing the hills, so it's good to know that if I miss a workout during the week, I can make
Oh,
up
yeah,
for it on the
absolutely.
weekend. So how does optimism help our aging well and cognitive health? Because I have to work at being optimistic. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, I guess it's because, it's because everything else, if you think about our body being healthy, being fit to do the things you want to do is a natural thing, right? But what I mean is it's interesting. Happiness in a way is a myth we create. Like what I'm trying to get at is you don't necessarily automatically have to be happy. You know what I mean? That's why you
Mhm.
have to work at it because of the fact that, but therefore, yes, like you say, absolutely, like I mentioned in the book, there are plenty. How does optimism help us? Not so much specifically from a brain health point of view, but optimism helps you from a healing point of view. So what is interesting, what I know from my own research is like even in studies we do on skin biopsies, for example, like even wounds that you have, it's quite fascinating to see that people who are optimists generally heal better than people who are pessimists.
Mm.
Right. It's just because the negative chemicals you secrete when you are negative, generally, you then tend to have more steroid production, you're going to have more things. So all these things then uh, suppress your immune system a bit, right?
Mhm.
So therefore, chronic low mood or being unhappy and that kind of stuff actually immune suppresses you, right? So therefore, it affects your healing and things like that. And thereby you can get other diseases, which then thereby may lead to your brain. So there's no direct specific thing, but what it means is that that's why in most studies we know it will show that if you're an optimist in general in life, you do better after procedures or after treatments, or you respond better to stuff just because our mind is so powerful, right? So there was a study done, in fact, in this, like you can even pick these, like, when we do the gene testing on people, we actually pick, other than the dietary things like we were discussing, whether it's starch or gluten or lactose or starch, we can also pick the type of exercise more suited for you. Like, for example, people say, should I do more weights or should I do more endurance? It's certain types of people we can pick. Similarly, there's certain genes which shows your optimism as well, right? And it's interesting, the study done many years ago in Harvard by Ted Kapchak and colleagues, and what they did was they did what they called a nocebo trial rather than a placebo trial. So what they did was these were people, typically it works for pain. So what they did is not for like a cancer or something, but typically for pain. So what they did is, so people who had really bad intractable migraines who were really needing to take medications every day, they basically put them into 3 lots. And on one lot, they said you were taking nothing. And then in one lot, they gave them acupuncture. And then the third lot, they said they're giving you that actual migraine tablet. But what they had done is in the trial, they had reversed it. So the guys who thought they were taking nothing were actually taking the migraine pill. And the people who thought they were taking the migraine pill were actually taking nothing, like it was just a dummy placebo. And what was interesting is 70% of the people on the migraine pill got better, even though they were and then there was 50% or so with acupuncture, and only 30% on the supposed placebo. But what they found is there was a commonality in the gene type for the optimist and pessimist. So there were certain people who were actually, for whom these things work better. And it's particularly shown to work for pain and things like that. So that shows the power of the mind, because all these people thought they were taking the real medication when they weren't taking it, but actually many of them got better. And the other way around as well, like people who were taking nothing, right? But but then the people who thought they were taking nothing, but they were actually taking the medication, which supposedly has been tested on a normal controlled trial. It didn't do much for them.
That's
So that
funny.
so that shows how much your brain power. It's so important to be optimistic.
So, in addition to reading the book, how can we learn more about the genetic testing that'll help us do all this great stuff that we've been talking about today?
Yeah, so basically you can just go to biohackingyourgenes.com and then you can see some information. You can order the test if you want, or you can read the book and the information is there as well. I mean, the book has a lot of other general tips like what we discussed just now, even for other systems of the body, not just the brain. It just goes system by system. So there's for musculoskeletal health, or for, various anti-aging things, like, for the book is more about health span rather than lifespan, in the sense it's more, even though there is an overlap. Obviously, some other things I'm talking about, if you did, obviously it means generally you will live longer as well. But that isn't the focus. The focus is more an optimal performance. But there's a lot of overlap. Like particularly women, we know that, for example, folic acid and B12 together, hugely important, shown to reduce your telomere length. Women particularly, which means it is actually anti-aging. You can see it at a DNA level. So they're like that tips in the book as what kind of supplements are generally good across the board, but also otherwise, if you want to fine tune it further, then you can order your gene test. And it's done globally. So anybody in the US can order it, and our lab will just ship kits over to you and things like that. And we only test for these health. It's more about prevention, not a cure. So we're not actually testing for any illnesses. So it doesn't actually affect any insurance or anything, because we don't do any illness testing. So we're not trying to say your risk for Alzheimer's is next. Like I said, look, there's no point if there's no treatment. So the way we develop the test is there are three parts. It should be something which is evidence-based. And then secondly, it should be actionable. So you should be able to take some action to get some benefit. So that's how so we don't test for anything which you can't directly make a difference like that.
I'm kind of curious what exercise is ideal for me, because I know what I do.
It's not necessarily always intuitive, but because, you can push yourself beyond a certain thing, right? You know what I mean? Like, so it's not always intuitive, because sometimes there are some exercises we know, like I said, as a general rule, there's no doubt that leg movement exercise is good for everybody. But beyond it, some people may be better off doing bit more weight than others, just because they're more at risk of either bone diseases or osteoporosis or various things the older. And so the more muscle you maintain, the better, and things like that, right?
When I was working with the personal trainer that helped me lose all the weight, she told me, quote, you burn more fat sitting on your butt if you put on lean muscle. The only way to put on lean muscle is to do weights. I'm like, fine. I still don't like weight training, but I do it 3 days a week because I've strengthened all the muscles around my knees, because my knees act like rusty hinges, which is annoying. And I'm not really interested in knee replacement, and I'm too young to even think about it. So I had to do something. And, the bone health, it helps you maintain your balance. And then I do 10 minutes of full body stretching just about every day, because boy, does that feel good. And I've heard that that's really good for aging because it keeps everything kind of lubricated.
Yes, it's flexibility again is important, but again, um, more from a point of view of if you get stiffer, then you're less likely to move, right?
Yes,
So,
true.
so yeah.
I'm feeling the stiffness today. There's one other thing I was going to ask you. Crud. I hate it when my brain gets sidetracked. So we get maybe I did ask because I was going to ask you about the testing. And so we can order that through you. That's really interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
I recently did a blood test for all the different vitamins,
Mhm.
and I was kind of over the top on B12. So I stopped was taking an extra strength B12. And she was an internal medicine doctor. She's like, yeah, I don't think you need to take that. But my vitamin D was like, okay. It was fine, but not great. So she put me on vitamin D, which I know is actually good for your brain and your mental health. So, which
Yeah.
I was surprised, being in California, you think you get enough vitamin D from the sunshine.
Yeah, I think now globally, there is a issue with us not getting enough vitamin D, particularly different parts. Obviously, Asia, the skin type plus people avoiding the sun, and then down under here because the sun is so harsh, people a lot more sunscreen and covering up. Typically, mineral sunscreen is like what my lab makes. Generally, won't affect your absorption, but some of the chemical sunscreens can. So I think it's just generally the most yeah, vitamin D is really, really important again. But I think, again, what we test for again is your susceptibility with all these vitamins as well. Like with the vitamins, we can test for some people who have a higher risk of getting low on certain things. So we can say, look, you are likely to need vitamin D, or likely need vitamin C, or likely to need vitamin E, or folic acid, or B12. But what I was mentioning earlier was we know that 500 micrograms a day of B12 and 400 micrograms a day of folic acid in females, which is just not the highest dose, but um, uh, adequate dose a day, does reduce your telomere length. So it is actually reduces the aging effects, and particularly more so in females and males, because females um, need less folic acid in the diet for the levels to go up compared to males. It's just a body mass thing. So this evidence so far is more in females than in males, but so those kind of things definitely help. I guess, if your B12 is really high, uh, it'll just, the body will just get rid of it. So you don't really need so much. You know what I mean? It'll just get excreted by the body anyway. It's not particularly as bad as if you have vitamin A, which is too high, you can get like hypervitaminosis, and that can cause, but B12 is actually okay. It just will show up in the blood test. So we'll generally know that you're taking supplements or something.
It'd be interesting to redo it. It hasn't been quite 6 months to see where the levels are with the changes, but holy crud, that was an expensive blood test. Even with insurance, it was like, oh, she should have warned me because I got the bill from the insurance company. I was like, yikes. So I don't know that we'll be redoing it anytime soon because it was 4 figures. It was not cheap.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, it was, well, it's
Yeah, yeah.
and
So
the B12 I was
it'd be
taking
cheaper than that, I think. Yeah.
with I think it was at least 1,200, or was it?
Okay.
Yeah, it was.
I think it was our gene test is about half that. I think it's 590 or 599.
Yeah, no, it was a extra strength one, and we had to order it from Canada. We got it from Amazon, but it came from Canada. So I can only imagine what it would cost me next. That stuff is expensive.
Yeah.
So
Ours is like a 70 panel, so it's quite a comprehensive one. It's about half the price of what you were saying now. And it is a saliva one, so you don't have to, we'll send you a kit and people collect saliva, so you don't need to take blood, because you can do a good sample from a gene testing from saliva.
well, I did that for the hormones, but dear God, the blood test for the vitamins, I was like, hello. I haven't eaten breakfast. I haven't had that much water. She literally had to change arms because she'd taken enough vials off the right arm that it started to, coagulate. And so she had to switch to the back. I guess too early in the morning for this nonsense, but it was interesting results. So I think it would be interesting to do your gene testing for the biohacking just as kind of the next step in my brain health journey, because my plan is to live the same age as my paternal grandmother, who was 103 when she died. And up until the very end, her mind was just fine.
Amazing. That's
Yep.
the most
So
important thing.
I figure since I got the fat gene from that side of the family, at least I better get the good brain.
Gotta eat this one. All the best. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate this. The link to the book is always in the show notes, and I'll link the website so you guys can go check out all the information, all the good stuff, and maybe learn a little bit more. I personally think this kind of information is better than going to the doctor and trying to figure out what's wrong with you. It's like proactive is better than reactive.
All the best, and thank you very much.
Thank you.